We're talking about living a healthy life. And I feel like you're a great person to talk to about that for many reasons.
I love the topic of living a healthy life. So yeah, I'm happy. Thank you for having me. I appreciate
Oh
the
my gosh.
opportunity, and to get to
Well,
speak with you about healthy things is fantastic.
thank you. So I guess let's first talk a little bit about your personal history because and like what led you to teaching yoga. I've been reading a little bit about you, and that really is sort of inspiring, especially like how you're so open about, your vulnerabilities and failures and, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about, yeah, like where it all started for me was with my family. So my parents were just like revolutionaries in the kind of health and fitness world. Back in the 1950s, they opened the first yoga studio in San Francisco, and before I was born.
That's great.
And so when I was raised around, a lot of health. My parents would take trips to India and study with different like health practitioners, yoga masters, different ashrams when I was pretty young. I think starting around the first time they took me to India, I was probably around 9 or 10 years old. And we would take trips pretty consistently there and study with different, again, masters and things like that. And then my parents had built a fantastic center in San Francisco. It was a yoga center, yoga and dance center. It had like a health food restaurant, a health food store, an herbal store. And at the time, like this is probably back in the 70s when I was a kid, that was pretty forward thinking. And so I was raised in that environment. When I was finally probably in my early 20s, I went through a rebellious kind of, like, okay, my parents are so into that. I need to kind of separate myself out. And so I moved to LA. I was raised in San Francisco, moved to Los Angeles. And long story short, I started to realize when I was on my own going to college that, wow, I had some really practical tools that I had learned growing up, like through my parents and through different features of health and yoga and mind body well-being. And I started realizing, wow, okay, the stress I'm dealing with in my life, I have these tools like yoga practice, meditation, breathing practices, and then the philosophy that went along with it, philosophy of not being overly attached to outcomes in life. Because I think sometimes when we're overly attached to outcomes or expectations, that can be a big source of stress. So that became kind of pursuit for me. Like probably in my early 20s, I started taking it really seriously, studying with different teachers, like BKS Iyengar is a teacher in India, and he's probably the source of making the more physical yoga practice, what we call hatha yoga, really popular in the
Yeah.
West. I think a lot of it stems from that teacher, Iyengar, and then I started learning some different disciplines, yoga, meditation, and then I started teaching as a side gig from my regular job. I was working in radio and going to school, going to college, and in the evenings I would teach yoga practices, yoga classes. And then it caught on and it became so popular. I was in like LA, Beverly Hills, West LA area, and teaching. And it just became my classes became very popular. And my whole kind of thrust was to demystify yoga practice, to kind of take out the new age stuff or things that often can keep people away from it. And I just created a very practical, physical practice that is made up of a sequence of poses And it really just caught on. I was teaching at a lot of fitness centers in LA, eventually opened my own center there. But that's where I got my start. And I think the affirmation I was getting, meaning like the fact that people were coming to my classes, it became very popular. It was hard to get into my classes. They would sell out. And so I realized I was onto something. And I just loved teaching and sharing with people the practice and seeing the results they were getting in their lives, the physical transformations, the mental kind of shifts in their perceptions about their own bodies, about life in general, dealing with stress, being less reactive in life, things like that. It was really fulfilling to me. And I was like, okay, I love doing this. So I went full on in that direction. Yeah.
That's so cool. It's so cool. And I find it interesting that, you know, like living healthy was like such a part of your family, but you didn't always embrace that. Yeah. So you had a moment, right? So, you know, because it was such a part of your lifestyle, I'm thinking that, like, you know, people who don't grow up and meshed in that, it's even harder to bring that into their lives. So how do you help people bring, you know, healthy living into their lives?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. I think, you know, one of two things. I think people tend to either be moved by inspiration, so they're inspired to get healthier, and they just kind of have that natural kind of mindset toward being healthy. We're moved by inspiration or desperation. So oftentimes people, they have to get sick, they have to have, you know, some kind of physical illness. They have, you know, whether it's some kind of like, you know, whether it's like diabetic type symptoms or heart symptoms or digestive systems, or maybe it's mental health. They're just overly stressed out and they need something to help make life easier and be more free and have some more peace and more strength, flexibility in their life, in mind and body. And I think that what's great about now, so when I was teaching in LA back in the 90s, yoga wasn't popular yet. It wasn't a thing. It was more of like, I don't know, the cool kids, you know, but actors and celebrities and people in Hollywood were coming to my classes. But the rest of like America, yoga was still kind of like, you know, you hear the word yoga and people think like yogurt, like what flavor, or they think, you know, like yoga, like you have to tie yourself up into a pretzel, or you have to, you know, move to, I don't know, the Himalayas and live in a cave or an ashram or something. So it had all these associations, but fast forward to now, it's very, you know, it's become popular and much more accessible. So I think that's great, is that, you know, someone's interested, again, either through their own inspiration or from a place of desperation, they really do have access to classes, whether online or going to classes. Their yoga studios now, you know, in most places, especially if you're living in urban areas. So it's really accessible more than ever, which I think is great.
Yeah. I do want to talk specifically about yoga, but I wanted to share something and get your opinion about this. I was just reading an article in Time Magazine, which I thought was really interesting, and it's called "Your Brain Doesn't Want You to Exercise." I don't know if you saw this, but it was like these like evolutionary scientists or whatever have been doing this research that suggests that, you know, our ancestors way back, you know, their physical exertion was in hunting and gathering and all that. And so they were conditioned to rest and to conserve energy. And, you know, the energy that they used was for practical purposes. And so as we've evolved, we're sort of still kind of conditioned to want to rest, I guess, is basically the theory. And so, you know, our brains don't really want us to exercise. So we have to kind of like train our brains to go against what evolution has, you know, ingrained in our in our brains. I don't know. I want to see what you thought about that
Yeah,
notion.
yeah, no, that's fascinating, really. And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that resistance, if it's coming from the brain, I think it's present for most people. I know it certainly is for me. And there is something to getting, I think it's train your brain to, it's like, I just have to do this. Like I have to get every morning I have to get on my yoga mat. Every morning I have to get out, go on a walk. I cold plunge every morning. So I'll do something physical. I'll do
Yeah.
meditation each morning. I will get in a cold plunge. None of those things, when I wake up the first thing in the morning, none of those things are what I actually want to do.
Right.
But I've trained my brain. It's like, no, it's just like I have to, whether I feel like it or not. It's kind of bypassing your feelings in a way,
Right.
because if I just go by what I'm feeling, I would just rather stay in bed or just get to work. But I think I know for myself, one motivator, an anchor and motivator is how it makes me feel when I do those practices, like let's say in the morning. And when I don't do those practices, there's a wholly different outcome. So when I do those practices, it clears the mental fog, it clears that general resistance in my body, my mind, my energy, that if I don't clear all that resistance, or at least get energy moving, then I'm left with that throughout the day. And if I compile that day after day, it's like this buildup of resistance and a kind of weight that I don't like. I think it's important for people to get that distinction, like to know the difference. Well, okay, when I do this in the morning, when I do these certain practices and I bring a discipline to it, I'm a wholly different human being in my day, how I relate to people, my reactivity, how stress impacts me, how I just feel in my body. I feel I'm a different person than the person who doesn't do those practices.
Right.
There's a different person that emerges, especially as you start stacking days and weeks and months of having given into lethargy and that like resistance of not moving, not breathing, for me, not meditating. But I think it's doing those things that we don't want to do. I just recently heard a study that is interesting. I think it was Andrew Huberman, someone like that was sharing a study that there's actually something in the brain where if we do things, it's not just doing hard things, let's say but it's actually doing things we don't want to do. If we do the things we don't want to do, and we go against what you're speaking to, that kind of natural resistance of like just wanting to be at rest. If we go against that, we oppose that and do healthy things that we don't want to do, it's actually, there's huge benefit to brain health, to overall physiology and biology and mindset that comes with doing the things that we don't want to do, but we know we should be doing for our health and well-being. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah. See, that's interesting. That's also a good point. Okay. Well, let's get into yoga a little bit. And like the health benefits of practicing yoga specifically.
Yeah. Well, a few things come to mind. So, there's something about using in yoga practice, the physical yoga practice, taking the pose, different sequences of postures in one class or one practice, done with deep breathing. It alters your mood for sure. It's like, you walk in, if you've done yoga practice, you walk into a class or a practice feeling one way, and you go through this sequence of poses and different positions with deep breathing and with, a concentration, like you bring your attention to your body, and there's like this physical presence thing. It takes you out of your head. What I mean by that, it takes you out of all the thoughts and worries and just all the thinking about the future, your to-do list or what happened in the past. suddenly when you're really engaged in a physical practice with breathing and intentional focus, you suddenly you start noticing something shifting in your mood. Firstly, your mood, you start getting energy flowing, and then you're also using your own body weight. So it's kind of a functional strength. You develop your own core muscles. You develop a strength to just like for practical, practical things during the day, whether it's like carrying groceries or just even picking things up. I think I remember reading a study where the majority of people that pull out like their low back, it happens like when they're picking up their keys, or like simple things, or just sitting too long and then standing up, like you're driving in your car. If you're living in LA, it's like you're driving, and then a simple thing like stepping out of the car, and people like they'll experience their low back going out, things like that. But when you're using your own body weight and developing your core through these series of poses in yoga, it creates an intrinsic kind of foundational strength, so that you can, just functional strength in life, so that whether you're carrying kids or you're carrying groceries, or you're doing, if you're an athlete at all, or even just a weekend warrior type athlete, to have that kind of foundational conditioning, it serves you that physically, whatever you're doing in life. And it also has a really powerful impact on your general posture. And posture is something that just naturally, gravity is pulling us downward and forward into a compression. So yoga practice, and again, going through the sequence of movements where you're taking your body through its full range of motion, forward bending, backward bending, twisting, and you're integrating strength and then flexibility, it maintains and creates coordination and like a natural mobility in your body, and it defies gravity. So you'll notice when you have a consistent yoga practice, your posture, you just more naturally, sit up straighter, your shoulders are kind of pulled back. And in that posture, you have a different kind of attitude. For me, it's like a different kind of outlook. If someone's in depressed, or even like a low grade kind of depression, you see their body start sinking in downward and forward, and shoulders slumped. But there's something when your posture is open and you're practicing and training it to stay open, it impacts your breathing, it impacts your digestion, it impacts your circulatory system. So I think it has impact on all the systems when your posture is improving, and you're not only maintaining it, but you're opening your body consistently and in new ways.
I was going to tell you, talking about that, so my father was diagnosed with lymphoma, with cancer. I don't even know. I was young. I was a teenager, and he started doing yoga. When he was originally diagnosed, they gave him around 10 years to live, and he got into yoga, and this was in the 90s, and he was not a actor, but he was not a yoga type of guy though at all. He was like, very buttoned up, a lawyer, suit and tie kind of guy, but he somehow found his way to doing yoga, and he got really, really into it, and he would do it maybe 3 times a week. And he actually ended up living for 30 years rather than 10, and was like adamant that it was yoga that prolonged his life. He just swore by it. So I do really feel that yoga, there's a really strong mind-body connection there. With that practice, right? And that's something we've talked a lot about. So
two things come to mind real quick. I'll just say that what I've seen over a lot of years and with a lot of people is there's something about yoga practice that it stimulates your body's it activates, is a better word, it activates your body's natural healing system, your natural like healing energy. it activates that. It also is very detoxifying. Like it has a natural cleansing. It stimulates your lymphatic system, which is like the body sewage system essentially around the cells. And but that kind of movement that you do through yoga practice, it sparks this natural kind of detoxification, and then it activates your body's natural healing systems. And so often you see people come in with different kinds of symptoms or diseases, and often you'll hear people just say, wow, like I haven't changed a lot. I mean, if you add diet, you know, and you really move from, you know, away from processed foods and sugar and that type of thing, and you lean more into whole foods and your diet, and then you start working with the philosophical side of the practice, which is more of your mindset, your outlook on life and your outlook toward yourself, and you start giving up judgments, you know, self-judging, and just generally you start being more relaxed in stressful moments. I think often it's amazing how you start noticing that like old symptoms that you were grappling with that have been sticking around just kind of give you up, like they disappear. Not to sound magical, but it's a real thing. So I appreciate your story about your father too.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, yeah, I did. I do want to talk about that a little bit, about the letting go mentally, because I do think that is definitely a component of like living a longer, healthier life. And I was reading some of your book, Journey into Power, and there were some really interesting little quotes that I wrote down because I thought they were significant. Like you talk a lot about unfinished business and like emotional knots, which I thought was interesting in that regard. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So unfinished business, that's a good one. That's a deep one. You know, something I found in myself and my own practices and wanting to keep growing and becoming the healthier person and becoming the best version of myself, like that. I realized, well, as human beings, we have billions and billions of experiences over the course of our lives, billions of experiences. If you think of, you know, each moment of each day, we have just billion, like we're having an experience right here. And then most of those experiences we forget about. They're just experiences and they're gone. But certain experiences stick around, certain things. And I know for me, for instance, like I had some things with my father that, you know, growing up, he was like old school. He was raised during the Depression. He, you know, was the oldest of like 11 kids. His father and his parents like had to work like 3 jobs just to be able to get food on the table, kind of thing. So he grew up he was old school, and so it was like he had, you know, he could be really dominating or controlling in certain ways, or just like old school and not show a lot of just emotion or connection. And I realized at a certain point, oh wait, I have an old resentment toward my dad, like old resentments and judgments that were just from the past that I was still carrying around, but I was carrying around this old toxic energy. And I was like, that isn't serving me. That energy in my system, that's like the energy of disease. Like it's toxic, just carrying old stuff. So the more I would keep meditating, the more aware I was getting and kind of waking up to myself and what are certain old habitual patterns I had, things like that. And I realized, well, okay, if I went and just said to my dad, I was like, look, I apologize. I've been kind of holding a sword over your head. I've been, holding this judgment from when I was a kid, but I'm like, I'm not a kid anymore. So I just want to say sorry because I know you did your best. I know that, he didn't have my parents didn't have, they didn't have Oprah when they were growing up or how to be a parent kind of textbook. So I knew they loved me. I knew they did the best they could, but I also knew, they did some things that that I was holding on to, and through a teenager's lens,
Right.
things like
Right.
that. So I was like, wait, I'm still operating out of a teenager's way of relating to my parents. And I'm like, I'm just going to let that go. And it's just
Yeah.
like forgiveness is very powerful. And it was literally, when I did that, it was literally like a straitjacket. It was like a 500-pound straitjacket I had been carrying around, like an energetic straitjacket, like something like that.
Yeah.
It just like dropped off of me. And I was like, I got so much freedom out of that. I'm like, okay, I'm onto something here. Who else or where else in my life I'm holding on to things that maybe
Yeah.
happened that are unfinished. So I'm like, I want to finish business. I think, in anything, like it's good to complete things, take on projects, finish them. So I think part of being a human being is if you have things that are unfinished, get to the bottom of it and finish that stuff so that you can move on into a future that where you're free.
Yeah, right. That's what I say. It's very freeing, right? To get that weight off of you. Yeah, and that makes you healthier. And another quote that you said, which I think ties into that also, is living our authentic selves, which I think is another component of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I think authenticity is, it's important because I think we, again, probably starting from pretty young in life, we take on other people's ideas of how we should live our lives, or maybe just even in our home environment growing up, or in at school with peers and friends and social pressures, and we adopt like ways of living, ways of viewing life, ourselves, that aren't really our own. It's like other people's ideas or for us of how we should live. And I think it's important to come back to, wait, what do I really think? And who do I really want to be outside of what I've adopted or what was handed down to me? And authenticity, to me, when we become authentic, our authentic self, you could say, we're living authentically, there's creative energy in that. When you're really just yourself and you're not, kind of wearing a mask, because we can wear different masks for different people. And then at a certain point, we're like, wait, who am I? I'm wearing all these different masks for different people, but where am I in all of this? And we can often find ourselves in the experience of having lost ourselves. And I think the way back to ourselves is through authenticity. And another way of saying that is like, you start telling yourself, just starting with yourself, telling yourself the truth, being really honest with yourself about what you really believe or what you really see or what you really want to do in your life, who you really want to be, and start telling the truth about that to yourself and maybe to others as well. And last thing about it, what I found is the way to do that, the first step isn't always pretty. It's because it's also telling the truth about where you're being inauthentic or acknowledging where you're not being real.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like you can walk around in life saying, I'm fine. You're running around taking care of everyone else all of the time. You're caretaking, you're busy doing everything for everyone else. But then you tell people, oh, I'm fine. When actually you're not. You're like exhausted. You're pissed off. You're like, there's a lot more going on perhaps. But I think to get real about that, starting just with yourself.
And how do you think, what's the best way to find that in yourself? Do you think it's through like meditation, which I know, that you do? I mean, is that how you find that?
I think meditation is a very powerful tool, tool. I think there's something about, we can kind of live in our heads in our thoughts and live in our imagination about things. But with meditation, what I find is, okay, it's like I kind of pause, I sit, and like this morning, I sat for 10 minutes, but I just pause. It's like pressing pause, like stop doing, stop thinking, and just drop into my body, to stop, drop in, and fall awake. And you kind of wake up to your breath, you just observe your breath, start observing thoughts. It's like, okay, I have all these thoughts coming up. And you start separating from, when you just observe them, you realize, okay, I thought I was all these thoughts I was having about myself, but I'm actually not my thoughts. I just have thoughts, but I'm not my thoughts. There's a lot of freedom that comes in that. And then you start notice in that awareness, you keep practicing that, because I think it's cumulative, and you keep showing up and you have a discipline about a practice like meditation. Awareness starts expanding. Then you start noticing about where you're being inauthentic in areas. Again, where you're saying things are one way, but actually they're actually a whole other, have a whole other set of feelings or, perceptions about it. But you start seeing these inconsistencies, you're just more aware in general. But meditation is very powerful, I think, is a tool for sure, to stop, pause, drop in, and wake up your awareness, wake up awareness.
Right. And I guess ultimately that goal is just overall being healthier, right? In your mind and your body, right?
Yes.
Gives you.
Yeah. And I think health is our natural default. And I think when we become unhealthy and that becomes the normal, and it's like, but I actually think what's actually normal is we're healthy, and and whole. And I think that when we start kind of waking up and we start seeing that, wait, it's not, these things that have become normal actually aren't normal, and I can actually shift my perception, how I'm seeing something. I can start shifting my ways of doing things. I can start taking on new actions, new practices, and alter the direction of things. So now I think the goal is to have healthy be the normal rather than unhealthy be the normal. And I think awareness is really an important first step to get conscious to it. Yeah,
I like that. I agree. Well, and one last little quote of yours that I just want to share. This was my favorite one. It's a little lengthier, but you wrote, if you are living in a body that is weighted down and unhealthy, you are robbing yourself of vitality. If you are plagued by anxiety and worry, you are denying yourself the peace that is so readily available to you. If you are controlled by your fears and emotions, you have sacrificed personal power. I love that. That's my favorite quote that you wrote.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to me, that sort of says it all about how, you're really in control of your being in so many ways.
Yeah, there's control, right? We are in control, but we don't know that. We can forget that. And when we don't know it, then that we're in control, and we don't know that we don't know it, it's just like a blind spot, it's outside of our sphere of awareness, then we can live again in ways like with anxiety or high levels of stress or fear or resistance in the body, or just general like low grade pain in the body, things like that. Again, it's those things aren't natural to us. What's natural is being just generally healthy. An example would be if you took your thumb and you stuck it into a pot of boiling water, let's say, you would notice now, and you pull your thumb out, you would notice your thumb is in pain, right? But when your thumb is healthy, you're just healthy, you don't really, like right now, you don't really notice your thumb, right? Like we don't notice. If we stick it in a pot of boiling water It's like, and then we take it out, it's like there's pain there. Well, consider, I would say, like the body, and then even like mental health. If you're being bogged down with anxiety or things physically, symptoms, it's an indication you're doing things that, the body speaks in a language we can all understand. It's really pain or pleasure or just neutral.
Right.
But I think that when we're getting any kind of pain, and I think mentally, physically, those are indicators that we have to take some kind of new actions. We need to alter our ways of living, our daily habits, and come back to a quality of life that is really natural to us, which I think is whole and healthy.
Right.
Yeah, there's messages, right? Like, listen to the messages that your body is telling you. Yeah. It's feedback, right? Feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anxiety is feedback. Yeah.
Pain
is feedback.
For sure.
Yeah.
Right. And you have more power than you think you do, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I would say I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, this was awesome. I mean, I think this was a great conversation. I think there's a lot, a lot of different things. I really appreciate your time so much. And I know Janae is bringing you some books to sign.
I heard that. That'll be fun to sign them. Yeah.
I appreciate that as well. Thank you so much. And maybe I'll steal one for myself.
Yes, you have to. You're a great interviewer too. You're really
oh my
great.
Gosh, thank you so much. This was so nice. Been really looking forward to this.